Good morning, Year 13s. It's Ms. Mac here, and as promised, I'm going to do a video for you. It says PES and PED, but I'll actually only be covering PES for this period of time, and then I'll come back and do PED. So you should hopefully become familiar with these terms PES and PED, and it'll become part of your economics vocab, such as ADES, and I don't know, I'm trying to think, NC, MU, yeah, so there's going to be a few abbreviations. Excuse me, I'm having some green tea. So what does it mean, okay, and how will you use it? So PES is the economic lingo for price elasticity of supply, and this is looking at the responsiveness of quantity supplied to a change in price. And note that word responsiveness. Whenever you talk about elasticity, we will be using that phrase quite a bit. And basically, like I've said here, it's about the law of supply. Price increases, we say quantity supplied increases, vice versa, ceteris paribus. But what we now want to explore is how much the quantity supplied increases. So it should increase, and I said should. Like right now, you would expect that the price of pharmaceuticals is increasing. Toilet paper is probably increasing. But if they wanted, if they were really quite nasty, the toilet paper producers could whack up their price quite substantially. But let's hope they don't. But if the price did increase of toilet paper, how much would the quantity supplied of toilet paper increase by? Like just a little bit, a lot, or just like the same as the price? So, and I've just put should here because sometimes, even though the price could go up massively, it might not increase at all. And if, for example, the coronavirus, the vaccine for that, well, the price could skyrocket. I mean, it could be, millions of, I don't know, dollars a dose, or, people could be offering huge amounts, which they probably would be, but it's not going to increase because they haven't got one yet. So, yeah, sometimes products have what we call completely inelastic supply. All right, so let's explore this a little bit further. So there are three types. I said types. I'm not sure that's quite the word for it, but let's go with that. We've got three terms here for you to remember, and the good news is when you do demand, same thing, right? You just drop the supply bit. So elastic, it's very responsive, all right? So it's saying that if the price was to increase even just a little bit, you could have a massive increase in quantity supplied. Right, so massive would be like really elastic. If it's just a little bit elastic, it might be just a little bit more. And so what we're looking at is an increase in price will lead to a proportionate. So I talked about responsive. This is another word that I want you to get your tongues around. Proportionately greater increase in quantity supplied. So I do plan to do our internal later, so if we want to think about assessment wording, proportionately greater. I also do know this comes up in the external exam for market equilibrium and allocative efficiency. So not on your radar right now, but just wording is really important in level 3. Some of you will probably learn that particularly with your assessments, the one we just did. Responsiveness, and in this case, elastic means an increase in price will lead to a proportionately greater increase in quantity supplied. Inelastic is the opposite, is not very responsive to changes in price. So you can increase the price, but what would happen is you don't really get much change in the quantity supplied at all. All right, and so what we see is a less than proportionate increase in quantity supplied. So just to think about these two products here, if I was to think of a very elastic product, I'm thinking right now, I've got another example I'm going to give you, but let's say like milk probably in New Zealand right now, the price could go up, maybe because everyone's rushing to the supermarket, and if again they were being immoral, perhaps the supermarkets could push out the price of milk. You can quite easily increase the quantity supplied of milk because we are a country with lots of dairy farms. So an increase in price could lead to a proportionately greater increase in quantity supplied for milk. However, another product that's quite inelastic, and it's something that we have studied, quite a lot in economics, and I've definitely mentioned this before, is the housing market in New Zealand. We see massive increases in the prices of housing, but we don't see a very large increase in the actual quantity supplied of houses. So, prices going up, we should see, according to the law of supply, an increase in the quantity supplied of houses, so the amount of houses on the market, but we don't. And why is that? Because it's inelastic, all right? And so, ponder this. Why would the supply of houses in New Zealand be inelastic? We'll kind of come back to that later. But yeah, it's like an internal I did with students, about why, well, it's not the entire question, but why would housing in New Zealand be inelastic? What's preventing them from increasing the quantity supplied of houses when the price of houses is being bidded up so much? That's probably not going to happen now because no house is going to be sold for the next, well, who knows how long. Unitary is this little funny phrase that I think in our class Pravanish kind of indirectly asked me, and that's about the idea, what if the price was to increase and the quantity supplied would increase by just the same amount? Then that's what we call unitary. So it's called exactly proportionate, exactly. So exactly the same response. And at this point, you're probably like, what is she on about? Like, these are just words and they mean nothing. So I've given you a few examples just in terms of some other goods. Potatoes, it's probably a reasonably good idea, or a big assumption that it would be elastic, and we'll come back to why that is later. But to say if the price of potatoes was to increase by 10% right now, then if the quantities applied increases by 35%, you can see that that's a proportionately greater response. Price has gone up 10, and then the quantity supplied has increased by 35. Right, so later, maybe when you come back from holidays, I might release a really old-fashioned video from the dark days of economics about like bungee jumping, and kind of imagine like what we're talking about is how much give the bungee jump cord has. And so with this potatoes example, there's a huge amount of give. It stretches quite a lot. We talk about like elastic bands, elasticity, elastic bands. So when you've got elastic supply, or PES, then the rubber band's going to give quite a lot. Whereas with inelastic supply, and I think paracetamol is a great example of this, right now, I mean, again, the pharmacies and that, I did see some. I went in when I was thinking about getting some, and it was quite expensive. And I was like, nah, that's like double the price I'd normally pay for paracetamol. Like, you used to be able to get a box of like 100 at the real discount places, or the real cheap brand, for like maybe $6. I've seen that. But now that was like $9 something. And I was just like, no, I'm not paying that. But let's just say if the price of paracetamol was to increase, the quantity supplied maybe only increases by 1%. And we'll again come back to what determines elasticity, but think about, like, from what I understand, paracetamol is actually produced in China, and although they're coming back to sort of life over there now, supply chains have been heavily disrupted. So even though the price could be going up massively in New Zealand, we can't necessarily get much more of the paracetamol to supply because it's inelastic and it's not coming into the country. And then the last example is that unitary, and there you go. Like, I was trying to think of a good that might be unitary. I literally don't know, but I'm just making this up. I'm thinking PES is not really, I don't know, can't see that it'd be elastic or inelastic, but say the price went up 10%, the quantity supply goes up by exactly the same amount as well, 10%. So that's what it actually means in terms of practical, practically speaking. So how do you know? So sometimes, like, we might be asking you to think about a particular good, like tomatoes, or pharmaceuticals is a good one for supply, farm products, I don't know. And like, we'd be like, what do you think the elasticity is? Like, what do you predict? Because you might be like, you later you're going to factor this into, like, if you're a government policy analyst, you probably factor this into decisions you make. You'd have to think about the elasticity of supply for a good, if you're thinking about making a policy about it. And so one of the key things you can do is, if you know what the supply curve looks like, you can get a really strong hint as to what the elasticity is. So we've got here heavy, right, which I've explained to you before, horizontal elastic, vertical inelastic. So you see here, this is perfectly inelastic because it's vertical, all right? The price could go up, but there's only a fixed amount of supply, okay? And so that's vertical inelastic. Whereas if you've got a supply curve that's somewhere in between, say here, and what we call unit elasticity, so it's quite steep, okay, it's relatively steep, then it would be inelastic. Perfect is vertical, whereas if it's quite steep, and steep's a really good word, then it would be inelastic, some between perfect and unitary. Unitary is that exactly proportionate response, okay? Price goes up 10%, quantity supply goes up 10%, etc. Perfectly elastic is where you can increase the price and you get an infinite response to it, like they can supply all they want. All right, so it's a rare example where supply could be perfectly elastic, and it's horizontal elastic. But if it was sort of relatively elastic, it's not perfect, but it's kind of elastic, it would be kind of somewhere again between here. So you'd see like a supply curve that's a little bit flatter, so kind of like, I don't know, like this. So you're kind of not perfectly flat, but kind of flat. Okay, good news again when we get to demand, same principle applies, horizontal elastic, vertical inelastic. All right, and how do you calculate it? So I've explained this to my class before. You know, we watched that video. I was cunningly trying to get you to watch it and then do the work. So we have two formulas in particular for PES, and we're looking at the percentage change method, which is just literally the percentage change. And oh, that is so wrong. That's supposed to say quantity supplied. I'm so sorry. I will change that. I don't want to interrupt the video, so actually I'll pause that and I'll do that. Sorry, I don't know what I was thinking. So your quantity supplied, obviously when we get to elasticity advantage, it's actually the same formula. You just swap out the S for the D. So that's why. So there's a hint. So this is what we're using. Percentage change, quantity supplied over percentage change in price. Really quite simple. The only issue is that it actually calculates the entire supply curve. So I'll just look at this units one. It would tell you the elasticity supply over the entire curve. And so that's good to know, but it's not entirely precise. And so the more precise method that we do use in NCA is the midpoint method, which is calculating the 2 points between. So kind of like between here and maybe here. So we're looking at a particular point on the supply curve. And actually really what we're looking at is the gradient of the slope of the supply curve between 2 points, whereas that's just the gradient of the entire supply curve. Yeah, so it's a big long formula. When we do have an assessment for this, which fingers crossed will be later in the term, or we may have to change it. If you had to do it in a test situation, I would give you a cheat sheet. So you're going to do that, and basically, so you do the maths, and you're going to come up with an answer. Okay, the answer is called like a coefficient, not a maths teacher, but basically the answer that you get. All right, and so if the answer you get is over 1, we say it's elastic, and these are some of the examples you might get: 2.3, some number over 1. If you get a number under 1, so like 0.8, 0.4, 0.6, something like that, then it's inelastic. Okay. If, however, you get 1, then it's a unitary. You've got a perfectly proportionate response. And so this what we're looking at is an answer, like it's just a theoretical example. If it's infinity, it's perfectly elastic, whereas if you've got an answer 0, which we might get soon, that is perfectly inelastic. So it won't change at all. So here's some examples. Now I source these from your workbook. They're question 7 on page 32 and 33. All right, so I just grabbed these ones. We don't really usually look at supply that much, so I don't have a lot of examples for PES, but I would say that you should now stop the video and pause it and have a go. All right, so have a go using that formula. All right, if you get stuck, the answer is in the back, but here is, you can unpause, how to do it. So the first example, firm A, it's just literally dividing the 6% by the 0.8. And as a hint, you always get the quantity change and you divide it by the price, or later we're going to look at some other things for demand. The quantity is always on top. So that's 0.75. And if we go back to here, that would be inelastic because it's less than 1. Okay, firm B, that's quite a long, complicated question. Okay, so you've got to break it down, and I tend to break this down quite a bit. You can rearrange that formula, so that's fine, but this is just how I would do it. So I'm breaking it down. The change 80,000 divided by the first quantity plus second quantity divided by 2. Brackets are really important here, so I work that out. So do that first. I do this way. Then I work out the answer to this, which is 0.5. Then I go, okay, the price, and 1 divided by first price, second price divided by 2. Again, brackets really, really important. And then, okay, what's that? So that's 1 divided by 5.75, and then that equals 0.17, and then lo and behold, it's 2.94. And again, what does that mean? It is elastic because it's quite large actually. Well, it's relatively large, it's over 1. Okay, so that's how you do it, but the working is really important to show all your working. Use the brackets. All right, I know some of you can just do this quite quickly. Bear in mind, sometimes the answer in the workbook's a little bit off, especially for this one. I think they use the percentage change formula so that you can get a different answer. Sometimes percentage change gives quite a different answer. All right. And here's the working for the other ones. Again, you can't divide, that's 0, so that's perfectly inelastic. Here, again, I'm breaking down the quantity, like changes. I do that first, and then I get this, and then I get the 0.4. This side I have rounded quite a bit to get 0.1, right? So changes in price, right, down to this, to this, to 0.4. All right, I'm just noticing I'm getting close to my 15 minutes. And why? It's down to time periods, people. All right, so basically what you've just learned All right. So, hope this is helpful.